Good morning. I love my glasses. I slept out here last night. I feel, I can hear the birds and I feel, God, maybe the most relaxed I've felt in, I don't know. It's hard for me to feel relaxed. So, I feel inspired this morning to talk for a while and just to document. It's been about 4 years since I sat on this porch and felt some things that helped me decide to change my life. And it's a complicated set of circumstances that allowed me to think certain thoughts and feel certain feelings. And it helps me every once in a while to just kind of tell the story again so that I can see what I've learned, what I'm learning, to see how different I feel, to see how things have changed and transformed. They've changed a lot. I can think back and I can remember the pressure that I felt all the time while I was in the group. I feel pretty comfortable using the word cult because I've studied a lot of things, a lot of books, watched a lot of documentaries, and the group that I was in for 23 years has all the characteristics of other groups that operate as cults, and so I believe that it is, in my experience, also a cult. Now, these characteristics, these cultic characteristics, you can find them in lots of other situations, and it's not always clear, this is a cult and that's not a cult. I think a lot of groups can have inner circles that are culty and outer circles that are not so culty. I believe a lot of churches operate in culty ways. I believe that there are a lot of tyrannical dictatorships that operate in culty ways. The pressure that I felt back then, I still feel it in my body because my body is still recovering from it. It was 23 years. It was a really, really long time. So I still have trouble breathing. I still have trouble sitting. I still have trouble just chilling. Which is why I'm really grateful that I have this little porch to sit on. This porch, honestly, may be the reason that I'm not in the group anymore. Not specifically this porch, but this house. And that's because when my parents moved here in 2017, they bought this house. And over time, I was able to move into it. And that is because my ex-wife fought for it. Now, in the group, I never asked for anything. I mean, sometimes I'd be like, can I be in this play? Or can I run? Like, I did things that I thought were fun for me to help me survive that space. But I never asked for more money. I never asked for... I came in there with a master's degree and I worked for minimum wage when I was paid. I mean, I worked for far, far less than minimum wage because I volunteered almost all of my time for free to all the group projects. But then when I was paid, like through the coffee house, I was paid minimum wage. And I've told all these stories before, so forgive me, but they just come up into my brain. The one time that I was finally made a manager after 20 years in the group, and was given, I think my wage was, I can't remember if it was $12 or $14 an hour, but I made that as manager of the bakery, and I literally cried and thanked Murshid for that. And that came from a space of me. I believed that I was giving of myself completely without any need to be compensated, out of a spiritual desire to give myself to that group, and that's what I did. I believed that. Now, my ex-wife, my wife at the time, didn't feel that way. She felt like we deserved more and we could live more comfortably, and she had this real inner fight against that. And that saved us, because she fought against great resistance, because Murshid, I'm going to call him Murshid because that's not his real name, and it's a title, and I can use that name all I want. And his wives never really supported us moving out here. It was always a fight. And then towards the end, we had to ask permission. And towards the end, when we just went ahead with it, we got a lot of flack for not communicating accurately, adequately, correctly about it, which was always true. Forgive my words, always and never. I know they're very extreme, but that's how it felt. And I was not gonna lead that fight, because Murshid's disapproval of me was the most powerful force, I think, in my life. His approval or disapproval. So to go up against him to move out here was more than I could handle, but she did it. So we moved out here with our kid. My mother was here. My dad had died. And the lockdown came. Or let me put it this way. COVID was coming, and we knew it. A lot of things had happened. One of the most important things that had happened is that I was on social media, on Facebook for the first time as manager of the bakery, and I was doing goofy videos and lots of funny things. And I had reconnected with old friends from college days in my 20s, before pre-cult. And so I was interacting over social media with lots of sort of regular left-wing people who were professionals and doctors and scientists and artists and social workers and people who were out there in the world, not in cults. And so that was an important thing. It allowed me, those interactions over social media allowed me to remember that there were people who were not in the cult who were also thoughtful and credible to me. And I had lost those relationships. My relationships over those 23 years had become very insular. I had created enormous tension with my biological family and my siblings. Indescribably horrible things happened. I'll say because of me. We all have personalities that are hard, but I was the one who communicated the least effectively throughout that whole thing. And I made that impossible by denying that I was doing that, and by believing that I was the best at it. And it was delusional. Geese. Hear them? Yay! So a series of events happened. And it's really hard to know if those are the things that helped me get out, or if those were just the things that I told myself afterwards. You don't really know. But I remember that I started to feel how mocked I was, how disrespected I was. God, there was one event I want to tell you about, which was that, so the restaurant was closing down because all the restaurants were closing down. March 2020, and I was the bakery manager, and as per usual, I worked many hours there without beyond my 40 hours a week, and never asked to get paid for those. That's against the law, by the way. But to me, it was a family business, and I didn't ever ask for it. So I would clock my 40 hours, but then work much more than that. And so, unpaid, my wife and I went to the bakery, and we worked for hours to get the place ready to close. We froze everything we could in the big chest freezer. We cleaned out everything that was perishable. We cleaned everything. We washed. We finished. And then the stuff that could not be frozen, dairy products, stuff like that, we loaded up in the car in crates and boxes, and we took it over to the coffee house because that evening we had planned a community-wide giveaway of food to employees and to community members, people who were kind of inner circle. We were going to give away all the milk. We were going to give away everything, right? And I remember very clearly, we were unloading, and boss lady, who I'm not going to name, was there helping us unload, friendly, helpful, like she usually is. And we had worked for hours to do this, and I said to her, do I need to come tonight to help with distribution? And I would have, because I always would have. I didn't say no to things. I avoided things like that extra group on Wednesday afternoon, because we had programs every single day. So when I could not go, even though I was racked with guilt, I would not go because it felt like relief. I wouldn't have admitted that to myself, but it was constant feeling of I should be there. So she said, no, you don't have to come. And she was friendly and warm about it. And I'm like, okay. Well, that evening, what I learned later is it turned out to be quite a lot of work, which wasn't that surprising. I'm sure it was a lot of work. And but Elaine told me I'm sorry, I just said her name. Whatever, that's her name. She told me I didn't have to come. She's like, nah, stay home. I'm like, okay. And maybe early that evening, there was a text message, and this is very cult leader kind of thing to do. The text was to me, but also to, I believe, all three of his spouses, wives. So it was a group text, maybe to Heidi too, but I'm not remember. It was a group text. Sorry we didn't see you there tonight. And something like, as a manager, something. Now, it's hard to describe to you what is behind those words, because for all those years, I was always terrified of his castigating punitive disapproval, which could come at any moment and was always a threat and always in the air. And it was the main thing that we all skittered to avoid, even though we weren't supposed to. It was such a trap. So behind those words is, you have disappointed me. You should have been here. Those things were devastating to me. I was crushed. And I wrote back, Elaine told me I didn't need to be there. And then there was no response, which is typical. And I just felt through every cell in my body how crushingly disappointed he was in my personhood, and that next day, I remember feeling a little bit pissed. And I didn't usually let myself feel that way, because on several occasions when I did let myself get pissed, especially at her, Mershid would almost immediately hear about it and come back hard and angry at me, just like you get mad at your mom and your dad crushes your soul. That's exactly the dynamic. I remember one time we had oh my God, one time our hours we had to cut hours in the bakery, and I had been working there. I'd worked there, I'd been working for them for 20 years, and I remember that there was a staff member, like a 19-year-old, who had worked in the bakery for like 6 weeks. I'm not exaggerating. And all of our hours were cut the same. And I had a kid, and my hours were cut back the same as the person who had worked there for 6 weeks. And I go, this doesn't seem fair. I mean, give me the hours, because I've worked for you forever. And she's like, that's not fair. And I argued with her about it. It's not fair to me with someone with a family who's worked for you forever to go down to part-time, the same as this 19-year-old who just started working here. And I got heated about it. And later that evening, Mercer drove around in his car and stared at me and I knew it was, I'm in trouble for getting angry at Elaine. And I had to, and I apologized. I'm so sorry. Oh my God. Anyway, the next day we saw boss lady, and she goes, just take the feedback. I should have known as a manager to have been there, even though she told me I didn't need to be there, and I was in trouble for it. And not only was I in trouble, but something was deeply wrong with me that I should reflect on as a human being, because I made that decision. It was always it was the stakes were always that high. I am damaged. I'm mentally ill. These were always the undercurrents. But then at the same time, I was blamed for thinking that way. God, it was so dark. So I remember lockdown happened, and I was surprised, but the programs were canceled. And I sat on this porch, and I felt relief. And I felt angry. And I felt misunderstood. And I felt like all you had to do was call me and I would have come. But you didn't. And then I was shamed. Not just, hey, we could have used your help. Sorry we didn't call. It wasn't that. It was, you are at fault for not having thought of it and not having known it, and you need to reflect on yourself and just take the feedback. So something in me did that. Something in me went and that was the first time in all those years that I let myself go. And I think it's because of lockdown. I didn't have to go every Thursday night, every Friday afternoon, every Saturday morning, every Sunday. Every single day we had things we were expected to participate in. If you were going to be a good Sufi, you would participate in those things. Otherwise, you were just marginal. And I was a person who went for it. I wanted the full spiritual realization and divine remembrance of our path and our masters and God. So I don't remember the whole chain of events, but at some point I sat here and my wife never would have said it because I would have been an asshole about it. So she didn't dare ever recommend that we back off. But at some point I sat here with her and I said, what would you think about backing off from the community life a little bit? And I was terrified. And again, I don't quite remember the chain of events, but I'm pretty sure pretty immediately she was like, oh my God, yes, please. And she was very shocked that I had said that. And I remember we did we cooked a meal. We went to the community center south of town. We cooked a meal for everybody, which was distributed to everybody. And sometime in the next few days, I went down to the bakery and I left my keys on the counter, and we never went back. And I sent an email, I think that day, and there was so much pressure in the community to not send an email because we had been witness so many times to people leaving the community and sending an email and having that be publicly ridiculed and those people be publicly ridiculed. So I was supposed to go and have a conversation with Dean about my decision. Now, I was supposed to take his guidance and seek his guidance, but something had broken inside me and I was not going to do that anymore. So despite the protests of my family, who were repeating the gaslighting accusations of the cult members and cult leader who always said, God, after all we've given them for all these years, they just sent an email. I sent an email and it said, thank you for something like this. Thank you for everything you've given us. We've decided to back off our community life for now. I left the keys on the counter. Please take me off of employment with the coffee house and the little grocery store in the corner. And I wish you the best. Send. Now, I replayed a zillion times what I knew would happen on that end because I had seen it and witnessed it. I had seen this happen, and now I was the guy doing it, which was absolutely, utterly terrifying. And I wasn't thinking cult. I wasn't thinking anything. I just was like, I feel relieved, and I'm stuck in this house, and somehow I feel brave enough to make a break. Now, there was definitely a period of transition. I mean, for a while, people brought us food. There wasn't at all a sense that we were gonna become, that I was gonna become what I became. I didn't know that. Community members brought us food, and even pretty soon after I sent that email, I blocked all the phone numbers and it's because I knew that in some level I knew no one was going to call me and say, hey, help me understand your perspective. How are you feeling? That was not what was going to happen. And at one point my phone called and my phone rang and it said Murshid. And I I think he left a voicemail, but I said decline, block. And everyone who called me, decline, block. And it's almost everybody called me eventually. Because I knew what was coming at me was not going to really hear me. And that was a pretty radical thing to believe, because I had learned to believe that my opinions, feelings were not relevant and didn't matter. I mean, the few times in our interactions, mostly around music, but the few times that I had tried to express how I felt, I was vehemently disapproved of or publicly humiliated in very verbally aggressive ways, over and over and over and over again. So Murshid calling me was not going to be, help me understand how you're feeling. What can we do better to help you feel included and seen? That's not what that was going to be, because only his opinion, feelings, thoughts mattered, because he was a divinely inspired guru, given a mantle of spiritual authority from a long line of spiritual leaderships and sheikhs, heading all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him. And he was chosen in a dreamlike, fateful whirlwind to be the successor to a spiritual enlightened master. He now is a spiritually enlightened master, and all of his behaviors and thoughts and feelings, no matter how weird they looked or felt, were there only for your benefit and salvation and spiritual realization. Given all that, how I felt and thought didn't matter. My job was to listen and to seek guidance and to do what I was told. I took a vow of obedience to him, and I vowed to keep his secret, and I vowed to trust. And it was also the community ethic to do all of those things, which I had always shown. And for the first time, I broke them. And so I sat here for the next month in total anxious, depressive darkness. Actually, that was 2 years, but we were stunned. So, in general, what happened after that was that I started Googling. And within, 6 weeks or so, I had a pile of books on my table that were about cults that I had gotten, and coercive control, and I had gotten the reading list from a master's degree program in Salford, right outside of Manchester, England. And it was a book list for a master's degree in coercive control. Coercive control is sort of, avoids the word cult, but it describes the power that people experience in intimate relationships and in groups that leads them to do things against their best interests. And the way it develops, and the way that it's maintained, and the way that it hurts. So I was in a state of deep trauma and very shaken. And then I did this. I picked up this phone, and I was walking down the street in my little neighborhood, and I said, I think I've been in a cult. And I started to describe it, and I started to make videos every day, and I read the books. And then I sat down and I wrote an article. It's about 6 paragraphs, and it says, I just left a cult after 23 years. and I published it on Medium, and I put it on Facebook. And my family was very angry that I did that. And thousands of people read it, which I did not know would happen. And that's when I started to learn the effect that the group had had on the town of Carbondale. And is still having on the town of Carbondale. That's a whole story in itself. They're still in operation 4 years later. And then, I was not in contact any longer with anyone in the group, obviously, but little tendrils came back to me, and it was really complicated and really difficult. People called my daughter, my kid, people called my wife at the time. Angry, hurt. It's so hurtful. It's very complicated to describe all this, but if you really want the whole thing, go watch the 200 videos that are on the YouTube channel. But right now I'm just giving you the highlights, or the most, what this is now is looking back 4 years, the things that were the most important. Out of those books, a couple really amazing things happened. There was a man who was a cult expert psychoanalyst, who was also who was available online, and I needed mental health care. And I wrote him, and he wrote me back. His name is Dan Shaw. I've never met him in person still, but I'm indebted to him for his kindness and his generosity. He became my therapist. He volunteered to do it. What I didn't realize at the time was that he works right outside of New York City, and he charges about 10 times more than he charged me. He charged me basically nothing. And he helped me to understand a lot of things. And then it turns out that on my Grinnell College alumni Facebook group was a woman named Jennifer Lalich, and she wrote to me and said, "Oh, my aunt is big in the cult world, and her name is Yanya Lalich, and she is in all the documentaries and wrote all the books, and she and I are now friends." But I reached out to her and had some conversations with her in those early days, and she was like, those connections were really important because these were people who had been out a long time, who knew what it was like, who had studied it, had written about it, and were living, thriving lives outside of their own personal experience with cults. Both Dan and Yanya had been in cults for a long term. Not as long as I was, but... So my world was spinning, and I started to talk about it. And I became like this horrific enemy, which was always so weird to me, because I was always like, I'm just trying to share what I think and feel, which I wasn't allowed to do. So suddenly I'm like, I don't know, they had this image of me as being on this, and they still think of me as being a mentally ill person who's on an anti-religious rant and a campaign to destroy them. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm angry and really hurt. The worst I've ever done is make a video and try to teach people try to share my experience. And, I've wanted to do little sabotagey things, but I never have because they have, security systems and TV cameras on everything, and like I don't know what would I have done, but I never did anything. So Dan was helping me, Yanya was helping me. I was writing. My family eventually, the big turning point with my family was that this was such an important moment. Sometime that summer, we were contacted by Elena, and I can say her name because she uses hers. And she came and she sat in the backyard here, right here, by the lake with her dog. She sat there and she told us her story. not the details, because she hadn't written them or spoken them yet, I don't think, but she told us enough, and we realized that he had groomed her, sexually abused her, and then blamed her for it. And that was very, very, very hard to digest. But it also enabled us to start to see the levels of deception at play in the group. Because I think to that point we were still like, they're good-hearted and kind-spirited, but it wasn't right for me. But when Elena came here and told us, we were like, this is sick. The whole thing is built on deception. And then I started to watch the documentaries. The Vow came out. A bunch of them came out, and I watched Keith Raniere, and I went, oh my God, it's the same. There's a series of like 6 videos of me watching that show and going like, oh my God, it's the same. Oh my God, it's the same. Oh my God, it's the same. And, Murshid in the background going like, we're not that. And it's like, no, we are. And they all say that they're not that. Keith sitting there saying he's not that. Exactly the same. And so, kitty, Primsy, Primmy. Okay. The other very, very important thing that happened that helped me to realize that I had been conned was at some point we were sitting in there with my wife, and she said, what's going on with our relationship? And I remember the moment, and it may not have been that long, but it probably was like a minute of me being quiet, maybe 2 minutes. And in that moment, I guess, these transitions take a long time because I didn't want to divorce. I didn't want all the things to change all at once because I didn't know what was coming next. Like, it was terrifying. We had given our whole lives to this thing. We didn't know what was going to happen if we gave it all up, which is what was happening, right? God, it was so intense. She said to me, what's going on with our relationship? And I sat there and I went, and I knew that I was going to have to say it out loud, and it was so scary. And I said, I'm gay. And God, even saying that out loud right now is so weird. It's such a weird position in the world. And it was very, very weird to have it, because to put that aside to marry her, which I did, thinking that would bring me closer to the guru and to the path, and it's complicated why I made that decision. But the whole thing is set up, the whole guru thing is set up to blame you for your decisions, even though you're doing everything for him. And he never told me not to do that. He never told me not to. Anyway, that's complicated too, but all along the way, he gave me signs and signals to keep doing what I was doing, which was to pretend I was a straight guy. So there I was out again. And for my wife, it was very, very disorienting for me. For her, it was very painful. And, what we went through over those months, years, is indescribable, that we did all that together, closed into this house. Her process is hers, but let's just say that she tried to make space for herself in this little tiny place with 4 people. I can't believe we lived through that. Right now it's just a blur. I mean, it went on for months. Now, my kid got to go to COVID college up in Champaign, which I think really was very difficult, very painful, but really good to get out of the house. And then without really any plan or agenda, I don't know how to describe it. I'm sure I didn't handle this very well, but I don't know. It's like making the videos. I just fucking had to, so I did it. Okay, so my dear Ron, who, I don't know, I'll tell you my version of this. He's a person, so I'm apologizing for dragging him into this, but we were on Facebook. He was posting these hikes. He's someone that I've been acquainted with for years. Not friends, but acquaintances. I wrote to him over Facebook Messenger and I said, can I come on one of your hikes with you? So I did. And I did it without really acknowledging the fact that I thought he was adorable. And I really liked him and his vibe. He is gentle and kind and nerdy in a sweet way and cute. And we went on a hike. And by the end of the hike, I had sent him a text message that said, I've had a crush on you. I did this while I was married, so, you know, it's ethically dubious. But I forgive myself for having bumbled my way into that. And by the end of that year, we were divorced by the end of that year, and we both had boyfriends. Now, it was, you know, a very arduous process, but this is my point. These are the most formidable moments, is that we were social distancing, and also I was still married, and it was all confusing, but Ron and I would go on hikes, and it was summer, and then we would sit on his porch in his house in Makanda. We would remove our shoes, and we would touch feet. And I desired so intensely to be close to him. And it was in those moments where I felt that feeling that I realized I had two simultaneous experiences. One of them was the joy of coming back into my body and of accepting how I felt and of feeling the desire, lust, like all of the stuff that grounded me in myself, which I had not let myself feel for more than 2 decades. In which, forgive me, I did not feel in a heterosexual marriage. We've come to terms with that, but again, that's another story of how we lived with that, both of us, how I lived with that, what that did to her, which was not fair, brutal, difficult, abusive. But that joyful, congruent, I'm a homosexual feeling of like, this is what my body desires, came with anger, rage, betrayal. And at some point I started to realize that someone who purports to be a person who brings you closer to God would not guide me away from the truth of my body and then blame me for it. And so later people were like, he's not homophobic, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that's not really the point. The point is that no matter who you are, what you desire, what you feel, what's congruent about your body, that is eliminated from your repertoire. That is erased. Hi. I did.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. You didn't come and wake me, and then I couldn't even find photos.
They are fed. That was Ron. Almost 4 years later. That's the biggest betrayal and loss, is of your body, what you know, what you feel, what you think. It's autonomy. It is what I most value now in the world, for me and for others. That's what makes it a cult, is that and the cult itself would say, they just want to do what they want. I think there's so many disparaging, negative depictions of why a person would want that, and I don't care anymore because it just feels so good. It's like, even if it's the wrong thing, or even if I make a mistake or I fuck it up, it's like I get to do that with my life, but I get the fact that the decisions are my own are mind-bogglingly and surreally. I don't know. It's still surreal that I get to choose. Like, I still live with this threat that I'm going to get in trouble. God, that's such a deep thing. So I went back to school fall of 2020, and I was going to go get a counseling degree. And there was something in that it was fine. And I was going to go that direction. But then I was hanging out with Ron, and he knew people who were in the communication studies department. And I sat out here on this porch with Nathan, who was the retired chair of the Department of Communication Studies at SIU. And he talked to me about performance studies and things in that department, and I was like, oh my God, I want that, because I wanted to be a performer. I wanted that, but I felt ashamed of it. Like, I shouldn't want that, because I was just drawing attention to myself. I mean, there was so much inner conflict about just being myself. I mean, look at me now. I wasn't allowed to be this person. I got so much shit for being who I was. So now I was considering, and I did it. I changed my school degree program to be performance studies, and I suddenly was reading. God, I just loved it. I loved it. Plus, it gave me structure. And then I learned how to make music, and then I wrote a whole master's research report on losing my creativity, and God, so many things have happened. My kid's about to graduate from U of I. My ex-wife is married, living abroad. And then Elena made a video and published her story. And that had the following effect. There was a satellite community in Germany with a house, and we had been there on a band tour 3 times. It was a lovely place, a whole, more than 20 years entrenched community of followers of Murshid over there. Well, he wasn't there to, threaten them. They had a little bit more distance, let's put it that way. And they came across, they had seen some of my videos, but they had kept their distance because they thought I was crazy. They thought I was mentally ill. And, but they a couple of the leaders over there had been thinking about some of the cult stuff, and they came across her story. And somebody had enough distance over there and enough guts to really encounter it, like to read it. And I think they were ready to hear it. And they took her story and they read it aloud in one of their gatherings. And this shook us all to the foundations. When they heard what had happened, what Mershid had done to Elena, 4 women over there that night said he also did that to me. And it didn't immediately come back, but that night, 4 of the anchors of that community, I mean, the oldest, most long-term leadership, and then most of the others, well, let's put it this way, at least 5 members immediately quit Mershid as their teacher, because it was their intimate relationships with the women who were like, he did that to you, it's done, it's over. We know now that it's a lie because he did that to you, and because look how hurt you are. Yet most of the people still in the group, the way that they can stay in the group is by denying, gaslighting the women who have come forward with their stories, or if they believe it happened, they believe it was for their spiritual benefit. That's a cult. Anyway, these 5 people over in Germany immediately sent Mershid a letter, and the letter said, "Get help. You are abusive. We quit you." And he responded to that letter by not addressing their allegations, instead by criticizing their communication. He criticizes them for not coming directly to him, but instead sending an email to the whole community. He has never, ever, and he never will acknowledge that he hurt a person. He is Donald Trump. So it's 4 years later, and hopefully in 2 years I'm going to have a PhD. There's so much to talk about, but the reason I like to do these, to like document these, is that every time it's a little bit different, and the metaphor that I'm using lately is that I was in this fog and now I can start to see shapes. So it's making more sense to me. The inner struggle is still very brutal, but not as bad. Like, I have very, very, very dark depressions. I do things that aren't good for me. I have very extreme emotional reactions to disapproval. Living in the town is very difficult right now because, a lot of people have said to me, "Why don't you get the hell out of Carbondale?" And it's like, well, I'm here, and I'm having to watch from a distance as the Sufi group continually reinvents itself and tries to market itself publicly as friendly, collaborative, convivial, and specifically lately, I watch as the forward-facing elements of the group, which is the coffee shop, the nonprofit, the grocery store. Those and specifically the women who are running these operations have the specific agenda to make it all look fine. And it's become increasingly difficult to deal with because I know that these are strong women who are, in their actions, enabling and defending someone who has sexually groomed as a spiritual leader and crossed the sexual boundaries of women and then taken no responsibility, blamed them, and discarded them. And I know what this has done to them. It's been hard enough for me, but these women have, in some cases, felt ashamed for years. So I've had to gradually let go of my battle with him specifically. I'm off social media now. I make these videos not very often. But even so, I got to tell you, even last night I drove down that road and I know at least one person saw me, and sometimes I just have to, I don't know it's still a work in progress. And wife number one, who I mentioned earlier in the video, she shows up at art exhibits and she shows up publicly, and it has a very specific purpose, and the purpose is to make it all seem fine, but it's not fine. The restaurant had its 25th anniversary last fall, and the images are full of people working for free. And it's not gone the way that he wanted. For years, he told us that thousands of people would come. He documents everything he says and does because he believes that at some point it will be revealed the breadth and depth of his vision and how he laid before us a model for how humans could live in spiritual community. And he believes that his words will ripple out in that way. And I hope that his words will ripple out as the delusion of a psychopathic predator who stole people's lives, all their money, all their time to work for his own personal comfort in a world in which he feels horribly uncomfortable, and in which he built a delusional lie to satisfy his own weird desires. I'm coming up on an hour. I think that's enough. So that's all. I'll just keep, I'm focusing on my own sanity, my own creative work, my own body, my own autonomy. Me. I say that because, if ever that's exactly what they will say about me, is that, I don't know, like when I was in the group, I would have done the same thing. Like they believe that I'm self-consumed. But if this is self-consumption, I'm happy to be living in it, because I got to tell you, there is no comparison to how that felt to how this feels. This feels good. So, thank you for watching, if you're watching this. And I'd love it if you would add your stories to the website, which is carbondalesufis.com, which I secretly really hope drives them a little bit crazy. You gotta have a sense of humor about this. So, here's to more nights of spring porch sitting and with my new love, and